Please sit.
So I wanted to start with sort of a Silicon Valley question to a guy who wasn't originally a Silicon Valley guy. One of the things I've seen that's been written about you is that when you came to America, you didn't go to work for a big company like Sears and Roebuck, although I think it might have been possible.
I went to work for a bigger company.
Which one was that?
The United States Army.
Okay. So why did you join the Army when you first came to the United States? No, why? What,
Why?
yeah.
I'm sure that most of the people here maybe know that I am a Holocaust survivor. And when I came to the United States, I definitely felt that I owe something to this country, and I believe always in paying back. And I lived in the east side of New York City the first 3 months, and I almost felt like I'm back in Poland with the smell of the herring and the onions and everything else. So I felt that it's more that I have to learn what this country is all about. And by joining the Army, serve the country, and pay back. And that's the reason why I did it.
And where did the Army take you?
It took me to Fort Dix. And from Fort Dix, I got orders to go to Alaska. And I was already married, and my wife was still in Germany. And I wanted to go back to Germany as a soldier. But the Army is, if you want to go to A, they send you to Z. But I had the chance to meet the commanding general, and I told him my problem that I have. Okay. And he has rewritten the orders, and I was stationed in Manhattan.
And there you were introduced to repairing typewriters in the Army, or did that come later?
There I was introduced to repairing typewriters and netting machines.
Okay. But still, when you got out of the Army, then you didn't go, had you had enough of big organizations?
I definitely then went to work for a small typewriter company to do the same thing. So I was working during the day, and at night, because I already had a little boy by the name of Sam, which is sitting here. And I also had to drive a cab during the night to make sufficient money. And after a few months, it came a day like Friday when you're supposed to get paid. And my boss didn't have sufficient money to pay his employees. So I was very surprised. And I went over to talk to him, and I told him, look, if you're in such bad shape because you haven't got enough business, I might get some business for you. He said, how? I said, well, I was in charge of the repairing of typewriters in the First Army, and they may want to outsource some products to you. Remember, that was in 1952. And he says, you can do that? Yes. So I went to my friends in the Army, and I got him a contract for a couple of dozen typewriters to repair. And he came back and he was shocked that he could get this, that I did it for him. But after about a month, the man never gave me a raise. So I felt very bad. And I told the guy that I'm quitting the following week. He was trying to give me a raise and everything else, but this what made me go into business for myself.
Okay. And when you did go into business for yourself, did you start in the United States or did you start in Canada?
No, I started on Fordham Road in the Bronx, across the street from Fordham University.
Okay. Ah, yeah, I know where that is.
Yeah, and they were my first customer of service in typewriters.
Okay. Now, I think, as you alluded to, I think many people, you've had more challenges in your life than many Americans. I think most of us here. One of them, which I just learned about, which I think most people don't know about, is you almost died in a jet crash.
Did you hear that?
I was reading a little bit of background, but it's a remarkable story. I mean, that's true. Would you tell that story? I mean, it was a literal jet crash.
No, in Commodore, we had a plane which was called the Pet Jet. And Helen and I and 6 other members of Commodore went from New York to California. We made a stop to pick up some dealers in Chicago. And from Chicago to San Jose, the plane starts smoking. And all of a sudden, there were no brakes, there was no radio, and the smoke started to get very black. And a Frontier airline heard a signal of some kind, and we landed in Des Moines, Iowa. And when we got out, after a few minutes, the plane blew up.
And you landed after the runway, from what I heard too. The plane went off the runway on
Yes.
Yeah. So it was.
Yeah, I have 9 lives.
And which one are you on now?
Oh, 2.
Another story I was hoping you could clear up for us tonight is the story behind choosing the name Commodore, because I read different explanations. How did you come to the name?
Army, again. Okay. I wanted to call my company General, but there are so many generals in the United States. General Electric, General Motors, all kinds of generals. Then I went to Admiral, and that was taken.
Yep.
So I wind up in Berlin, Germany, and we were in a cab, and the cab made a short stop, and in front of it was an Opel Commodore, and that's the way I got the name.
That's good. Now, another in my little bit of background research, you're well known for the statement that business is like war.
Yes.
But what I discovered, you also are well known for saying that business is like sex. So which is it?
It's both. It's both. It's war and it's fun.
Let's focus on business as war.
Right. Don't you want to speak about sex?
Maybe later.
Okay.
Where did that come from? What?
Well, you know, I traveled quite a bit around the world, and I found out that the most successful countries, right, are approaching business like war, especially like Japan. You dare to win. As soon as you have your wings down, right, you lose. The important thing in business, many young people which are here, right, you have to be your biggest competitor. Not somebody else to compete with you, but you have to compete with yourself. If you have a product which is very successful, you have to think immediately, what is the next one? How can I do it better? And this, to a certain extent, was the success of Commodore.
Now, that interacts very well with sort of the nature of Silicon Valley, which is all driven by Moore's Law. You bought MOS technology very reasonably early on as you made this transition. When did you sort of, was there a point at which you got the connection between sort of the falling cost of devices because of Moore's Law and your own business strategy? I mean, they were sort of...
That was strictly help from Texas Instruments.
Okay. In the form of, they started it. Is that what you mean?
No. I sold my editing machine company, and I got into the electronic calculators, and then to handheld calculators. And I was buying my chips from Texas Instruments. And I was doing extremely well. And the Texas Instruments decided that this is too good of a business to leave it only to one guy. And they went into it also. And they slowed down the shipments to me. Really almost cut me off. And believing that business is war, right? So I decided I have to find a way how I can get back and not depend on the outside and be vertically integrated. So I used to do business with a company called MOS Technology that was supplying me some chips, a very small percentage. But I called them, we met, they were in very bad financial shape. They were losing $100,000 or $200,000 a month, and they needed help. And I decided to buy that company and turn it over to become strictly a Commodore supplier.
Yep.
Except some companies like Apple, we will supply them a little bit.
And you never, well, so I wanted to ask you about that. Now, so there was a period when you were supplying what fraction of Apple's 6502 processor?
I really don't know, but I know that we gave them a few for free.
But you never played the game that TI played with you?
No,
Interesting.
I don't believe that.
Yeah, interesting. But in buying MOS Technology, you met this guy by the name of Chuck Peddle.
Yes.
And he came to you with this idea of the microprocessor.
Yes, what happened there is they were losing a lot of money because they had about 100 or 200 jobs from different companies to develop product, and they did not get paid in advance. And that's the reason they were more interested in the engineering than in making money. They thought it comes from heaven or something. So when the item come into my office every half hour to explain to me what they're doing, almost the last one which came in was Chuck Peddle. And he showed me a product called the Kim. The Kim was a board, a PC board. Mm-hmm. If you attach the keyboard and the television, it was actually a computer. And he told me that the idea what he has to integrate these three pieces into one box, and it can be a computer. He says, I would like to continue to do this, but you have to move me to California. And I did not know that much about computers. Yeah. But my son, Leonard, which was going to graduate school in Columbia in astrophysics, he knew something about computers. So I asked him to come to Valley Forge. He looked at the product. He told me how fantastic it is. So I gave Mr. Peddle 6 months to come up with a prototype. And if he does, right, he can stay on. If not, goodbye. And 6 months later, we went to a Chicago Winter Electronic Fair, and we showed the product. It was an unbelievable success.
So it's the personal electronic transactor? Was
Yes,
that what?
yes.
Where did that name come from?
From Peddle.
Ah, okay. And at that point, did you have the vision of home computing? What
No.
was this? What did you think the pet would be?
A product that I can sell.
Very honest.
But I was not sure, how many, to who, how, and when. Uh-huh. Because it was always, even what Leonard was telling me, it's general, it's good for everybody.
Yeah.
So the question when we came back from Chicago was, how many of those computers should we produce? And nobody really had the answer. So the idea was to go to Arthur D. Little, which is a research company, and if you pay them a certain amount of money, they will research and tell you what the future is. So I went there, or I called them, and they gave me a price of $5 million to do the job for me, and it will be ready in 12 months. Well, I read something about that, that IBM did give them $5 or $10 million to research if they should buy Xerox or not. And Arthur D. Little told them, no, it's a bad thing to do. So I definitely felt that this is not the right thing. So what I have done, and I came up with an idea to reach the public, and we had some ads in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And after 2 weeks' time, I think it was, we had an ad that people can send in $599, and they will get the machine between a day and 120 days.
How did you pick that price?
I just felt that I can afford to pay for that. No, I definitely believe that if you can afford it, you should always sell a product for no more than 100% of your cost.
Okay. Okay.
Because if you sell it for too high, you invite competition.
Yeah.
If you have a decent price, competition will not try to copy you.
Yeah. Now, from the success of the PET, you were on a rocket ship. Tell us a little bit of, did you spend time trying to create a corporate culture? There are lots of stories about how tough a manager you were. Did you think about sort of, there was this term Commodorians, for example, the people who worked for you. Did you think about sort of what it was like?
The same way as I was trying to produce good computers for low prices, I was also trying to produce millionaires.
Okay.
I think I produced more millionaires in our company than anybody else. I wanted to be, it should be a family. Everybody should work together. And my personal job was not to tell them how good they are, but to tell them what they're doing wrong so they can improve. We live today in a different world. Oh, you did such a good job, my God.
Well, this is interesting. I mean, what's your view of a company like Google, for example, who seems to be...
Google is not making a product that's strictly innovation, and they need to tell people how good they are. It's a total different kind of product than hardware.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about, did you use Microsoft Basic ever, or did you use your own Basic?
No, we used Microsoft Basic.
You did? Okay. What was it like to do business with Bill Gates?
Easy.
Okay.
He came to see me to try to sell me the Basic.
Uh-huh.
And he told me that I don't have to give him any money. I only have to give him $3 per unit.
Sold. Yep.
And I told him that I'm already married.
So what did you settle on?
And I told him that the highest price I'm willing to pay is $25,000. And about 6 weeks later, he took the $25,000.
Great.
And since then, he doesn't want to speak to me.
When did you do? Was that with the PET or was that after? That was with the PET.
Right, from the beginning.
Yeah. So
he did not make a deal with IBM yet.
Yeah, this was pre
IBM.
Yeah, so it was probably good money for him. Did you ever go through a period where I saw that you had sort of become aware of the importance of the electronic calculator market by visiting Japan, and I was wondering if you ever in the period that you were at Commodore felt threatened by the Japanese and the way the personal computer industry as a whole did. Did you ever feel like you were competing against Japan Inc.?
No, if you're competing, that's too late.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's the reason why I was aiming to sell a computer for $199. And I know the Japanese, they cannot turn on a dime. It takes them a year or two or three to come up with a product.
Uh-huh.
And they plan that the product will last for a certain amount of years. So I felt that the product is low enough and good. Japan can be even a good market, and they will not come to Japan.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I introduced the PET in Japan. I could not deliver sufficient products to Japan, and I was selling them there for $100 or $200 more than in the United States.
Okay.
And then after 2 years, after selling I don't know how many units per month, NEC made an announcement that they are coming out with a personal computer. The following day, our sales dropped by 99%.
Really? 99%?
99%. Because we Japanese will wait till we get a Japanese computer.
I see. Yeah. Now, I've also seen that you were seen as a typewriter guy. That's to mean a hardware guy, and that you sort of opposed the idea of bundling, and at a certain point that came back to hurt you.
Yes.
Is that something you felt
you
would have done different?
I recognize it, yes.
Okay. How would you have played it differently if you could have now? If you could do it over again now?
No, that's the software was just as important or more important than the hardware. But which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah. Maybe you could have bought a little company like Microsoft at that point.
Apple was for sale and they offered it to me.
We took apart the first PET and just looked at the chips inside. And, okay, they used dynamic RAM. Good thing they didn't do what all these hobby computers did and use static RAM. And just looked at the parts and pretty much came up with, well, the chip cost should be about the same as what ours is, but we don't have to supply a TV. Use your own.
And Jack, I heard that there
we also had TV in the PET, the first machine.
Yeah, the PET was built in TV. We didn't have to build one in, so we saved a little money that way.
Right. Except the customer did.
Yeah, but we had similar thinking. Keep the cost to the user down. Your home TV is free was one way we did it. Also, cassette tape drives. Use your own cassette tape drive from home. Everyone could get one cheaply, and that was mass storage in the early days.
Jack, there was also, I heard that you guys considered using CP/M in the 64 and then discarded that idea. Do you think that if you had used the CP/M operating system, it might have, it sold really well, but would it have given it more headroom or perhaps allowed it to go in a business direction that it didn't go?
It could have, but we decided, like I say again, to have it out that fast, because to me the most important thing is to be there first, get the market, and when you have the machines out there, the software will follow, and you get a name.
Were you planning on going in a business direction? You had these machines besides the Amiga that were in the works before you left. Did you have?
No, the Amiga was not in the works before I left.
It's tough to talk about operating systems because the starting machines didn't really even have a floppy disk yet. About a year later, the Apple II being expandable, we could add one, and it was very difficult for Commodore. I think it was our president, Mike Scott, who always boasts about how they had one single source part, and he tied it up worldwide. So they delayed them a half a year or something on getting their floppy disk done.
When I left Commodore, I believe in 1984, and I took Helen, my wife, on a trip around the world, and I was interrupted in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, and by a fellow by the name of Steve Ross, which was the chairman of Time Warner at the time, the owners of Atari. And he asked me, please, you're the only person which can help me to get out of this mess. And MOS was losing $100,000 or $200,000. He was losing $1 million or $2 million a day. Yeah. And I cut my trip short. I came back a month later, and I made a deal with Steve of taking over Atari. At that time, Atari was funding the Amiga chip. So all of a sudden, I was in control of the Amiga chip, not Commodore.
Now, I've always wanted to ask you, you'd had this bad situation with Irving Gould, who had been the chairman. Was revenge one of your motivations? Did this give you an...
No, see, this is where I lost my killer instinct, Instead of get the revenge, I just told him to pay what the cost was and some profit, and I gave him the chips.
Yeah, we wouldn't consider it revenge. We would consider it a prank.
Right.
So, Bill, what was the timing of the PC Junior? I know you weren't the PC Junior person, but how did that play out versus Commodore 64? Did that unwind the PC Junior?
I don't believe it. I think the PC Junior unwound itself, frankly. I think there was a basic flaw in trying to artificially limit the performance in a product and bring it to market at a different price, and it was a big mistake. Frankly, it just the original plan had been to have a second generation PC within 2.5 to 3 years, and that isn't the direction that the PC group took it.
And then, Adam, talk a little bit about the interplay between the 64 and the Amiga, and could that have been handled in a cleaner way, and would it have made a difference for the Amiga if there had been a better roadmap?
There was really no interplay. There were two completely different technology directions. So as I said, we had to start the Amiga essentially from scratch. We couldn't do that on our own in the time frame. So the attraction was the chipset that Jay Miner had designed at Amiga, and bringing that in-house with everything else that we had was our way forward. And even then, I mean, one of the things we struggled with is getting the application software written for the machine. That was a really, really tough task. And in the long run, it was probably the thing that worked least well for the Amiga.
I wanted to ask you from this vantage of history about the price wars in the personal computer industry, and you know, if you could have gone about it again, you know, you took the low road. It was incredibly successful. Ultimately, it wasn't. Would you have managed the price stuff differently?
I don't think so.
It'll come.
I don't think so. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can we get?
But today, the world is totally different. We have a company called Taiwan Semiconductors that anybody can go there, right, with the design and make the chips for a very decent price. When we were manufacturing the 6502, right, we were the only ones. There was one more other company which was making it. If I would have bought these chips from someone else, right, I could never come up with a price of $199 because I had to plan what kind of yield I will get from that wafer in time to come, and take a loss from the beginning. You see? So I had to plan, being such a good engineer as I am, and knowing that the product is going to be able to give us the following yield, and because the more you produce, the better, faster you get the yield, and that's exactly the way it worked out. So without MOS technology, Commodore wouldn't be as successful as it was.
So it was about vertical integration.
Right.
We were, at Atari, we were really focused on video games, as was said. And so we were really late. We really didn't see this. We originally came up with a project of the Atari home computer to try to get Steve from stealing our employees, and it took off. And then Jay Miner did the chip for our thing and went on to do the Amiga chip, one of the greatest chip designers ever. So we wanted to avoid competing with Commodore because their price, Jack's right. I mean, we just didn't want to be down there at that market price at all. We never really did very well with made a lot of money off the personal computer.
Was there a time where you could, I mean, I think there was the show you referred to where the 64 was announced, where the price was just sort of unbelievable to the industry. Do you remember that?
That was in Las Vegas.
It was in Las Vegas.
No, that was something we wanted to stay out of. But I do remember the 6502 microprocessor was quite the thing, and we used that in the original Atari game. That was in the Apple II.
Right.
And I remember one of the West Coast computer fairs, the guys from MOS Technology were there handing out parts. Had a barrel of these things, and that was really impressed, I think, everybody how low-cost processors could be.
Yeah.
I mean, they were the Commodore compared to the Intel with the high-price stuff. So yeah, that was quite a show.
Jack, do you remember that the jar with the 6502s in it at the West Coast Computer Fair?
I wasn't there, but I believe it.
Because I was just reading about this, and apparently they wanted to make it it looked like they were getting a lot of yield, and so they had a whole jar for them, and the dirty secret was the ones down at the bottom didn't work.
Yeah. And I remember when MOS Technology was up for play, and I tried to get Atari to buy the plant, and Manny Warner said, no, you got enough trouble over here. So Jack got it and did very well with it, yeah.
Do you guys have a different answer to that question? Was there a Commodore culture of users, and was there an Apple culture of users, or was it?
I think it was.
How would you describe the differences, Jack?
I only know the Commodore culture. You know, I used to travel around the world and go to computer clubs, and there were many young people which could afford to buy the product. And then there were these high-class people which were devils.
I did too. I traveled the world at the same time to computer clubs, continually, computer club, because that's where we came from. And I love those people. And yes, so many of them, especially the younger ones in high school, had the Commodore 64s and spoke of them. And I said, oh, because you couldn't afford an Apple. Well, yeah, they'd like the bigger Apple, which was expandable, but they'd say, but you can do this and that and that, and a few things on the Commodore that you can't do yet on the Apple. So but the enthusiasm in the people is what was important. They were very similar. The same people that, basically wanted an Apple would love a Commodore 64 if they had to, and vice versa too. I mean, they loved their machines, and I never saw anybody comparing, oh, you only have a Commodore. Never heard that once in my life. I think they were actually much more similar. They were two different groups of people, maybe a little bit in terms of just how much money they could afford for the computer. But they were similar otherwise in what they were trying to do and what they wanted and loved.
We made machines for the masses. They made machines for the classes.
To drive that point home, I had a lunch with an early Apple software designer, a guy named Paul Mercer today, who's now at Palm. And Paul was one of those 12-year-olds who talked his parents into getting him an Apple II instead of a Commodore. And the way he did it, his parents took him to the bank and co-signed the bank loan to buy the Apple. So I guess it was some kind of an object lesson.
There's no problem. I meet all these people that run companies that talk about how they used Apple IIs when they were young, and not that many that came up on the Commodore 64. So there might be a distinction there. I don't know. But,
so, Jack, were you ultimately planning on going in a business direction? There were two machines that were on the drawing boards.
Yeah, I was planning to go in the business direction.
So you didn't have you saw that as a market that was...
Oh, yes, it was a different market.
Yeah. And you just didn't get to.
No, I wasn't there long enough.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever patch things up with Gould, or is...
What?
Did you ever patch things up with Irving Gould?
No, we just had different opinion how to run a business.
Yeah.
And there's no question, like said again, I left, and the culture stayed with me, and he was trying to change it. It didn't work out.
Yeah. He went through a series of CEOs very quickly, I think, after...
Whatever, it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Did Commodore have any challenges in the knockoff market?
No, we did not.
Was there a reason?
I don't know, maybe because it was very inexpensive.
There was no margin for those guys.
It was.
Very interesting, because I never knew of any, so I wondered.
There was no knockoffs.
Very interesting.
Although it did get reverse engineered.
Hi, going back for a second to the emotional connection and the cultural connection, Jack, you went over to Atari, and all of a sudden, almost overnight seemingly, you have the company that you built in your crosshairs. How did that feel emotionally to you?
It didn't feel good.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You see, but I felt that if I cannot do it my way, right, then I have to leave.
You have to leave, right? Did you perhaps intend at some point not to completely destroy the company you built via competition, but maybe put them in a vulnerable position where you could come back, maybe acquire them? Or
my aim, and I won, was to destroy Atari.
Yeah. When I came in, I realized that they did a very good job. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Nate, and I have a question for Jack. I'm curious when you're going to publish your memoirs, since you've been kind of private about your life.
Well, I'm not dead yet.
And any other stories about Irving Gould?
Any other stories about Irving Gould?
No, like saying when we split, I had my job to try to build a new computer company called Atari, and I found it very, very hard because the people were game-oriented, and I had a very, very tough time. And we didn't talk at all.
Okay. A question there. Go ahead.
To me, it was very important to have respect for the customer, for the consumer, and to give him something what he might enjoy. But as far as luck is concerned, the harder you work, the more luck you will have.
Thank you, and the more persistent you are, I believe, or dedicated.
I once owned a Commodore, P128. And I don't know if anybody in the audience knows about it, but I love that computer.
Yes.
And you also had a P256.
Yes.
And you came out with them in 1983, if I recall.
93?
83.
83, yes.
And I was wondering, why weren't they successful? Why didn't...
Because it looks to me like we were very much dedicated to the consumer, not to business. And that was more, right, a stronger, more capacity computer.
Yeah, the 128 meant 128K.
Right. So we did not put that much emphasis on that particular machine.
Yeah,
But it was a good one.
I had that in my office.
Right.
And it was better than the IBM. It was better than the Apple at the time.
Yes.
And, you know, I mean, and it was cheap.
If we would have more customers like you, we would have continued.
I just wondered, it didn't seem to be pushed. And I guess you've really answered that question. You didn't think it was worthwhile. It didn't fit your business strategy.
Model, right. Our capacity of chips, we only had so many, right? We had
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why.
Yeah. But it really roared.
I'm sorry.
It looked like an apple.
That's the reason why I stopped making.
And it had curves, and it was very stylish.
You see that? Oh my God.
And what did you think? Are you even aware of some of the visual and audio artistic works that were created for the C64?
Yes, I was, because I was traveling to different countries, to different places, to different organizations. I've seen them. And people came over to me at shows and told me how successful they are and what happened. And I was very proud of it.
Thank you. This side.
I have
Research. What was your view on basic research in a computer company?
Not much. But we did spend about 5% of our sales for research.
Yeah.
And because we were in the semiconductor business, and that required research. And the computer itself was always planned around the chip. And we planned the chip, what we wanted to do and how we want to make it.
Were you aware of Xerox PARC? Were you aware of Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center during the late 70s after they invented the Alto?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
Yeah.